cares what you or I do. They really just care what's in it for them. And you should listen from now on to what people say. You know, if you're at a networking event, for instance, and you know, people chat about this or that, the weather and the Red Sox and things like that, but there's always that moment when somebody says, so what do you do? So I want you to start paying attention to what people say. What they will do 99% of the time is they'll tell you what category of business that they're in. And then everything else that they say amounts to the positive attributes of the category alone, and they never differentiate themselves. If you listen for that, you will hear it. And not only listen to other people, but listen to yourself, frankly. Are you actually differentiating yourself? The point is, nobody really cares philosophically what you do. They'll only care about it if there's something in it for them, and that's part of what we're trying to solve here. Now, verbal branding. I'm going to give you some of the nuts and bolts. Here's a couple of the basic things that it involves in order to build this platform that I'm talking about. Plain language differentiation. Differentiation is a big word to me. How do you actually differentiate the market? I'll talk some more about that. A conversational application. I'm going to walk you through that. And again, simplicity has to be included. It has to be the glue in the thread, or things just simply don't work near well enough to my way. So combine all those, at least these things, and you might just be starting to build a verbal branding platform. Now, branding is a huge topic, by the way, and people are concerned about all sorts of the components having to do with branding. Colors on a website, the content, whether they have a slogan or not, whether their materials are unified, you know, how they're positioned is what I concern myself with. I don't do any of that other work. But I do concern myself with positioning, what's called positioning in the branding work. And there before you is my definition. As simple as it is, no pun intended, but it's very, very simple, and this has never changed, by the way. I've been doing this for 13 years, like I said before. This definition has never changed, and it will never change. We want to know how you are different and better than the competition. Different from them and better because of it. You're the only option because of your positioning. Now, there's also a thing that I just like to think of as the conversational dynamics. Now, this is verbal branding, so we are talking right now, at least to build this out a little bit, about what are the actual dynamics that happen when people speak to each other. It could be at a networking event, it could be in a sales situation, it could be anything. But what actually happens, and is it working when you're talking to somebody, just in the most normal way, a normal business conversation? So if you see in front of you now, I have the word memory and curiosity. Now, memory, I put a star there, and here's the thing about it. Memory is by far the most important thing that I pretty much ever talk about, and it's because of this. So think of this, and I want you to remember this for the rest of your life. No matter what you do, you cannot get people to remember more than maybe one or two things about you. So when you talk to somebody today, the fact is, and it is a fact, by the way, it's cognitively true, it's scientifically true, it's definitely my experience and probably yours if you think about it. When you talk to somebody today, or if they talk to you, what's remembered a day and a week later might be maybe one or two things. Maybe. And that's if you do a good job of trying to get them to remember something that's hopefully of value. But you know what the most common thing is? People remember nothing. So my way of thinking, if somebody understands that I'm in the branding world and that's all they remember, that, well, this guy, he was a branding consultant, and they don't remember that I teach and develop verbal branding, then I lose. If somebody only remembers what category of business you're in, to my way of thinking, that's almost the same thing as remembering nothing. There's no differentiation there. You're still in the same bucket as everybody that you compete with. So this whole memory thing is so unbelievably important. And the truth is, if you stop right now and take this one bit of information as fact, and it is pretty much a fact, and let's say we all just got off this webinar right now, but you truly absorbed this, it would change the way you communicate and interact with people forever, and it should. You have to know this from now on, that people will not remember more than a thing or two about you, and it's at least possible that they may not remember anything unless you do a good job of making sure that you brand yourself, in a particular way. I call it verbal branding, but that means we're going to differentiate you, and it has to be valuable to them. So we'll talk about this more and more. Now, curiosity is kind of an indicator of whether your positioning is any good or not, quite frankly. If people are genuinely curious to hear more after you've told them why you're different and better than the competition, then that means you probably have, pretty good positioning in the business world. If the alternative is true, that they seem bored or they're not listening or they don't ask you anything about it, then that's an indicator to you as well. It's like a red flag. Curiosity is a way around that red flag. That's how you can tell if you're doing a pretty good job or better with your positioning in the business world. So look for that. Treat it as a positive sign. If someone's genuinely curious to hear more, you're on the right track at least. So memory and curiosity are a couple of the conversational dynamics you need to know. And again, I'm just going to be a little bit obnoxious and remind you again, memory is by far the most important thing. Unless you're in a retail environment or an impulse buying situation, which is usually not the case for most companies, you need to focus on what it is you need somebody to remember beyond your category business. And it has to be differentiation oriented. Okay, now this is the verbal branding platform. So I'm going to walk you through this, and indulge me. I'm going to walk you through and make sure you understand this as best I can. Usually, a lot of times when I speak, I have people right in front of me, and I can see whether they're waving their heads up and down or side to side. But I'm going to trust that you're going to follow this. I'm going to go a little bit slow, but it's really important that you understand the logic of this platform. So you see there's sort of a pyramid, a triangle, if you will, on your screen. And I have to tell you, if I had my way, people would only think of this all day, every day, as the organization of ideas that I'm going to describe to you. Number one, on the left, it says everything about you. So part of what you're looking at is this pyramid represents every single thing about you, your product, your company, whatever it is that's the target. Every single thing about you. Most important information at the top to least important at the bottom, flowing logically down. It's simultaneously a conversation of any length, and once again, most important information at the top to least important at the bottom, flows logically down. So it's the same information going top to bottom. Now, here's how this all works. Now, remember what I said about category, right? Nobody cares. Nobody cares what we do. But at the tip of this pyramid, because of the ability of people to absorb and remember things, the rule is that you can never, ever have more than one or two ideas at the tip of the pyramid that differentiate you from the competition. So here's the category business that I'm in, and this is why we're different and better. Number one, number two, could be one. Two is acceptable as well, very definitely. But here's the trick of it. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to be able to say it. Now, whoever's on the line right now, what this might already remind you of, sort of indirectly, is, well, there's this thing called the elevator pitch. Well, if you were sitting in front of me, I'd ask you how long is a typical elevator pitch. And everybody says 30 seconds. That's correct. There's a 30-second commercial, they might call it. There's an elevator pitch that's pretty much always 30 seconds long. Every once in a while I hear somebody say, oh, I've been taught 6 seconds long. Every once in a while I hear somebody say, oh, I've been taught 60 seconds. Well, I have to tell you, this is a terrible, terrible idea to have a 30-second thing that describes you. That is tremendously too long. Absolutely the worst idea I've ever heard. People get immediately bored. It's something that everybody tries to memorize and say, of course, right? You got to memorize it because it's so long, and people can tell. So it's canned, it's memorized, it's written down, it's a manipulation of language, and it just takes way, way, way too long. Now, let me back up for a quick second. See this right here? If you cannot do that, if you cannot tell someone your category and then why you're different and better in 1 or 2 concepts and in 5 seconds or less, it's my very, very clear opinion that you are losing brand, sales, and communication ability, not just in general, but every single day. Unless you don't talk to people most days. If you talk to people every day, you're losing money every single day if you can't do what you're looking at right now. You have to develop these ideas. And I'm telling you that the elevator pitch methodology is flawed out of the gate, and to not use it. Here's what I'm going to suggest that you do instead. I call it the crazy test. And that means that you need to answer, why would somebody be crazy to not use you, to not buy from you, to not work and partner with you, whatever it is that you need? Most environments, of course, it's buy. Why would somebody be crazy to not buy from you? And what that tends to do is just strip away all the extra language. What's the answer to that question? And when you figure that out, in a sense, those could very well be the concepts that you could use that will position you within the marketplace. You always have to analyze whether there's differentiation there. That's part and parcel of this, of course. But I suggest you start with this idea. What's the answer to the crazy test? Do you know that answer? And it's got to take you just a second or two or three or four or five to say, and never more than one or two concepts. Now, let's follow the logic of this platform. So we just got finished with really just a few seconds worth of content that was said to somebody. And by the way, it can also be written quickly too. The dynamics are very similar, by the way. We're talking about this in terms of verbal branding, the spoken word at the moment, but the dynamics are very similar, if not just about the same, for the written word too. But so, if this was me, I'd say, well, I teach and develop verbal branding. That's the tip of the pyramid for me. It takes me a second or two to say. And somebody's naturally going to ask me more about it. That's what we want. We know we've hit the mark, at least somewhat, if there's that curiosity that I talked about. So, you have to be ready to answer that. So this level 2, if you will, the next level of detail and answering curiosity, as you see on your screen, all that really is, well, you're still talking about your differentiated positioning, but you're just adding one more layer of detail. You're describing it at one more layer of detail when you're answering that question. And, I hope you can trust me on this because I've seen it for years and years. If you have even B- positioning in the market, that different and better idea, as long as you're doing pretty good at that, people will ask you for more information. And you've already started the process of them remembering you better and staking out your brand into the marketplace. So I hope you're following the logic. It's very simple in a way, but you've positioned yourself. You're continuing a conversation, presumably, with somebody by giving them a little bit more detail. That's a minute or two in at most, at very most, by the way. And, well, there's still the rest of this, and it still follows the same logic, where you're just digging deeper and deeper into the detail of this entire branding platform, this branding framework. Now, the trick, again, is that all this detail is in service of different layers of description of what's at the tip of the pyramid. So if you're a Walmart and you're the cheapest guys in town and that's the reason people buy, well, all this pyramid, all that content going downward, logically, would just be different and deeper levels of detail having to do with how it is that it's possible for them to sell stuff so cheap. If you're Volvo and safety goes at the tip of this pyramid, well, all that information is in service of a continuous explanation on deeper and deeper levels of how it is that their cars are so safe. And some of the detail down the bottom, where you see this now, it says profile and total capability. Some of that information, frankly, is just going to be neutral to the positioning. But again, remember, we're talking about every single bit of data that has to do with what it is that your company is or your product or your service or yourself. It doesn't matter. Again, what the target is, the dynamics are always the same. So down the bottom, we've filled out all the white space, all the detail of everything about the company, the product, etc. But that information is really just profile, capability, commoditized information, if you will. And it might be the kind of things that are asked about in a longer meeting. If you meet somebody at the networking event, you want to cover a level 1 up at the tip of the pyramid there, concept 1 and concept 2. You might, you definitely have to position yourself. You're definitely going to have somebody ask you more about it, and you'll answer them. But beyond that, quite frankly, if somebody's truly interested in what you do, in most business environments, you're going to probably want to have a cup of coffee with them sometime. You're going to have a longer meeting and sit down and dig into the whole thing a little bit more. That's the type of information that goes down at the bottom of this pyramid structure. So what we've done is we've taken every single thing, everything that does and might come up, and put it within a logic, a branding logic framework. And it's all within that pyramid structure. Most important at the tip to least important at the bottom. What's at the tip is what somebody hopefully is capable of absorbing and remembering. But you always got to talk further to people, so that's the meaning behind all this structure and all this organization of ideas. 5 seconds if you look down and right, 5 seconds, 2 minutes, 1 to 2 hours. Remember I said it's a conversation of any length. I'll remind you, the trick is that you're never really truly talking about anything other than what's at the tip of the pyramid, because that's the most important strategic information for somebody to know. That's what differentiates you. Now, I just want to point this out. If you have more than a couple people around, you know what? If there's more than one person around, let me put it this way. As long as there's more than one person around, could be 2, could be 10,000. It's the tip of the pyramid and a little bit of that extra information that further describes your positioning. That's what you want people to own. You ought to be able to walk up to somebody at any moment of any day and say, hey, why should anybody care about us? What's our positioning in the market? And they should tell you that information readily. Have it just come right out of their head. So I'm going to give you another tip. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. And you can use this today, by the way. I get feedback on all this stuff, and the thing that I get the most feedback on pretty much is the elimination of the elevator pitch mindset, because I talk about that all the time. I just can't stress that enough. You do not want to think that way. You do not want to develop an elevator pitch. But the thing that I probably get the next amount of feedback on in a positive way, because people can use it right away, is this. And this is essentially the way to marginalize your competition. And here's how this works. So if you're looking at your screen, you'll see that I've highlighted everything except for the tip of the pyramid. So everything other than the 1 or 2 ideas that position. So I call this the 95% rule. Now, here's what that means. 95% of companies do 95% the same thing as their competition. So I always want to remind people that that is not a criticism. Everybody's in the same boat. And this is one of the areas where when I do have people in front of me, they're always nodding their head up and down, because it really just rings true, doesn't it? Everybody's doing just about the same exact thing. That's the nature of business, not a criticism. It just is what it is. But it's really important to understand it, actually, and to be able to use it to your advantage and your benefit. So instead of trying to sell based on what's within the 95% rule, which, by the way, is what pretty much everybody does, which you can use to your advantage, I call this the of course category. So philosophically, when asked about anything within the 95% category, this of course category, your answer can be, of course we do that. Everybody in our line of work will do that for you. And in fact, if that's all you're looking for, you can find it anywhere. However, if you're interested in and see value in what I've described, now you're talking and referring to what's at the tip of the pyramid, your position. If that interests you, we are the ones to go with. We are the ones you should be working with, etc. So I hope that makes sense. This is usable today. This is important. This is one way, and a very good way, of marginalizing your competition, because I promise you that hardly anybody knows how to differentiate out there. I see it every day for years and years. Nobody really, with rare exception, knows how to do all this stuff. You will be able to differentiate, and you will know that 95% of what everybody's doing is basically the same. So treat it that way. Stop trying to sell based on what everybody else is also doing, just trying to shine it up as if it's different, because it basically isn't. And it doesn't matter, by the way, whether we think it's different or not. The consuming audience sees it as about the same. So we can use this to our advantage. Treat it as the of course category, and putting your own spin on it if you like, putting your own words to it if you like. But that's really the logic behind it. Of course we can do that. Is that all you're being offered from the other party? If that's so, well, that ain't much, because everybody does that. You can find that anywhere. We're good at it. They're probably good at it. But here's what you need to know about us. Now you're going to refer back to your differentiation, right at the tip of the pyramid. So to simplify, see what you've done is you've marginalized your competition first off. You've also simplified your entire messaging because you don't need to focus as much on all this other data, all these other descriptions that everybody gets all caught up in. You know, these really long conversations have got to go. They have got to go because they're losing you sales, they're losing you your brand. And as long as you use a little bit of professional artistry with all this, you can redirect people back to your brand and have it work out just fine. And now you're controlling what people are really truly thinking about when they think of you. And as I said, maybe even most importantly, what they got to think of tomorrow or next week when they think of you. So if that makes sense, it's very, very useful out in the field when you're talking to people as the of course category. Now here's a bit of a trick question. So I would ask all of you to think to yourself, how many business conversations have I had in my life? And again, it's a little bit of a trick question, but I do this for sort of an important reason, I think. And the answer almost always is, well, some people say hundreds, but the real answer is thousands, right? Like most people that have been around for even a little while have had thousands of business conversations. And what I want you to think about is that in reality, when it comes to this thing called branding of any kind, but especially for verbal branding, and especially when it comes to people interacting directly, there's really only two conversations that you and I have ever had in our whole business lives, and that's these. You are either the same or you're different from the competition, period, end of story. And you need to know that. You need to know that starting immediately, because if you're the same, then you're losing opportunities and market share and money every single day, in my opinion. If you're different, you have to be valuably different, and there's where the rubber really starts to hit the road for an explosion of your business. I've seen it time and time again. Just got to stay out of the sameness. You got to make sure that people understand you're not just different, but you're valuably different, different and better. Now, you don't have to talk that way. Maybe I already said that, but I'm just going to repeat myself. You know, you got to be careful how you talk, right? We're not trying to sound salesy. We're not trying to sound boastful. It's a very good idea to say, look, we're a little different than everybody else that does what we do, and here's why. So you got to be a little careful of saying the words different and better, but it is a good tool to use. That is the description I use. It is the definition that I use to make sure the development is correct. Now, have you seen stats like this? This is fairly recent, less than a month ago, on a site. This guy, Roger Dooley, runs a site called neurosciencemarketing.com. Does a lot of marketing research. A lot of it, frankly, is B2C, but it still is very applicable in the world we all live in our business lives. And there's other information like this, but I thought I'd throw these in because I think they're just so interesting and really to the point of the speed with which you have to make sure you're differentiating and making sure you're controlling your messaging in a very thoughtful way. But in order for somebody to start to form an opinion about you or about your company along the lines of, say, oh, trust, how about trust? 1/10 of a second. That's incredible. How about when they open up your website? How long does it take to form an opinion about your website? 1/20th of a second. That's what they're telling you. That's what they're telling everybody. This is science that has been done, research that's been done. And for somebody to form an opinion about you, less than a second. So I put this here because I want to drive home the point that you just don't have the time. And one of the things I mentioned, I hope with an abundance of clarity, was that you cannot afford to take the time to have an elevator pitch be white noise out in the world. You just cannot afford it. You must be much clearer about your messaging. And these are some of the reasons because of research like this. But to tell you the truth, it's just absolutely my experience anyway. I trust my gut as well. I've been in the field for over 20 years. I know that you've got to capture somebody's attention right away, and it has to be differentiation-oriented, and it has to be valuable. Now, let's stop real quick, and I want to make a point to make sure I'm clear on this one point. So here's the thing. We are not sloganizing. We are making an explicit offer to the marketplace. We are not coming up with contrived, fancy language. We are making an offer that is valuable and different than the competition. This means we have to work at this. You will not figure this out today. You will have to work on it and test your messaging. And it's worth it, though. You know, you're making a valuable, differentiated, positioned offer to the marketplace that literally says to everyone that will listen, everyone within earshot, that you're different and better, period. Anybody would have to be crazy to not use you. Here's why. That's what the one or two concepts at the tip of the pyramid are for. Without them, you will underperform. You will underperform unless you are that clear and thoughtful and accurate about what it is that you're selling and what it is that someone can expect to be delivered to them. So I stop because I want to make sure people are not confused. We're not contriving language. We're not making stuff up. We're not using buzzwords. We are making an explicit, differentiated offer to the market that fits all the criteria that I talked about. Now, just for the fun of it, you know, I think this is sort of interesting to go through. You know, what's out there in the world that people would recognize just to illuminate a little bit of what I'm talking about? I'm going to give you some real-world examples. You know, that you've probably heard of, some of which, well, some of them you have, some of them you haven't, frankly, and that's part of the point. Now, save money, live better. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, listen, out there, it's not verbal branding, but what would fit basically the criteria of what it is that I'm talking about. So verbal branding criteria, explicit offers on the left is usable, on the right is unusable. So follow the logic of this, and here's how I'll describe it. Why would somebody, you know, care about you or me or some of these organizations? So Walmart tells us that you're going to save money and you're going to live better. Well, if you think about it, if somebody said to someone at Walmart, hey, why should I care about you? Well, the answer could conceivably be, with full logic, the reason you should care about us is because you'll save money and you'll live better. See how the logic holds together in a conversational setting? We try harder. That's Avis, right? Everybody knows that one. Hey, Avis, why should anybody care about you? You should care because we try harder. That's what they're saying to us. It makes logical sense. 15 minutes, 15% is Geico. You know, there's a reason those guys have been using this for so long. It's been, boy, I don't know how long it's been. It's been over a decade, I think, at least. It's been quite a long time. And talk about simplicity. And this is not the most exciting messaging I've ever seen, but there's a reason why they keep using it. It's because it works. It's because of the criteria that I set out for you. Now, they didn't work with me on it, right? We know that. But still, the reason it works supports what I'm telling you. It's simple. It's memorable. It's an explicit offer. And a week or two later, if you thought about Geico, it's very possible, especially when they're able to throw a lot of money at advertising, but the point remains the same. You might conceivably remember this 15-minute, 15% thing, and there's a reason that they're using it for a long time, because it works. It doesn't have to be creative and exciting. That's not the point. The point is to make it better offer. Now, on the right, these are not usable from a verbal branding standpoint. So turn here is fidelity. If you've seen on TV, if you recognize this, they have the green line and they say turn here. So remember how I set up this logic. If somebody said to Fidelity, hey, you know, you guys over at Fidelity, why should I care about you? Why should I buy from you? The answer could not and is not be, it would not be turn here. There's no conversational logic to that. So that's not an explicit offer to the marketplace. It will not work as well. It's just as simple as that. And love what you do, lots of times people don't even recognize that one, because it's actually a couple of tries ago for, if you know, no, it's BlackBerry. Well, somebody over there thought it was a good idea to try to sell BlackBerry phones with the tagline or slogan, love what you do. Why should I buy a BlackBerry? Why should I care about them? Well, the answer is definitely not love what you do. So if you follow, there's no conversational logic to that. That is not an explicit offer to the marketplace. No wonder those guys are having trouble. The next thing they came up with, by the way, was be bold. I don't need BlackBerry to tell me to be bold. I'm either going to be bold or I'm not going to be bold. That has nothing to do with my phone. So those guys have got to get their act together in all candor, and I don't know what direction they're going other than out of business. But, well, whatever. You know, they're not doing it right. That's my opinion, I guess, but it seems obvious. This last one, Awesome Life Redefined is RCN. I saw this on a billboard. It was fairly new. A couple months ago I noticed it, and I just thought it's a great example of, I guess some people have too much time on their hands. I know I'm being very critical, but I want to make it very clear to you that these things do not work. They might be fun to develop, but that's not what we're looking for if you think verbal branding has anything to do with your ability to grow and succeed. So we are not looking for sloganizing like Awesome Life Redefined from RCN, because I don't know what's that got to do with them selling me something that I think would be better than their competition. In my mind, it has absolutely nothing to do with it. So those are a couple of examples on both sides of the spectrum. One side that would work, simplicity is there right in front of you. The other side on the right, the unusable versions, are contrived. They are sloganeering, and they will not work. And as much to the point as anything is that the listener or the reader has to translate it into an offer rather than have it be an offer already. I hope that makes sense. I want you to be clear about this. Verbal branding is a particular thing. It has to do with differentiation, but it has to do also very much with being explicit to your audience so they don't have to translate things. Now, I'm going to go really fast on this because I want to make sure that we have time at the end. I'm going to go over a couple more things, paint the bigger picture. I'll do that real fast, but first I'm going to show you these are real clients of mine I've had over the last few years, and these are all organizations that, very high-level organizations, a lot of sophisticated people around, needed to differentiate, needed to unify their people, and it always includes, can you execute what's been promised out into the marketplace? When you make an explicit offer, well, that's how you're selling it, but you also need to execute on that, so it's operational in nature as well. So here we go. So a wealth management company, you know, they all do about the same thing, right? Remember the 95% rule? Well, this wealth management firm had it's not just that they cared about the urgency of money, because all wealth management firms and people in that industry would care about it, but they actually had a system for it, an actual model that they used, that they implemented for all their clients. It was better than anything I ever saw, the components of it. So what did they offer the marketplace? Well, the category is wealth management, but they were different and better because they had a system for financial urgency. That's the conversation they had with everybody. That's what they described. That's what they sold. That's what they delivered. They sold it. They unified everybody around it, executed every single day. The consulate, that's the British consulate, you know, they don't just do passports, right? That's what people think, but they actually have predominantly an economic development function. So they had a unique ability. This is what we worked on and came up with is, you know, what are they really doing every day that's of value? They had a unique ability to provide an expansion of services that would last forever. That's the conversation that they had with every prospect they have. And by the way, just to back up a little bit, the wealth management firm, their meetings started expanding the next day. The British consulate, because of this simple messaging, became a model domestically across dozens of locations that were doing British consulate stuff. They became the model across the domestic landscape because they had a focus on not just what they talked to everybody about, but they built out the, you know, again, it's almost like a model that they built out for what? For an expansion of services that they provided that lasts forever for their clients. They had a unique ability to do that for a whole host of reasons, and that was all broken out and made into a logical platform. Telecom firm, well, I tell you, one of the boringest things in the entire world to sell is telecom services. Well, this company, to make a long story short, well, they had a piece of software that would it's basically a relational database. It would track all the services that a client had. It had the ability to spit out 1 million versions of reporting that would hit someone's desktop daily, weekly, monthly, anytime they wanted, to anyone in the world, anywhere, anytime. And they can make business decisions based on that information. So it would go right into their email, hit their desktop, and there they would open it up, and it was passive information. So this telecom firm, instead of talking to people about the price of their dial tone and the expansion of their, bandwidth of their network and the type of technology in their network, they disposed of all of that because that's all commoditized. all part of course, 95% rule stuff. And they said, look, we're a telecom firm. You know what we do. But what we want to talk to you about is our management platform for executives to make decisions. That's the conversation they had. They sold it, they unified around it, and they executed on it every single day. And boy, did they explode with business. Geo-environmental firm, so check this one out. Talk about simple. Now, I will tell you that they didn't really use this as much for selling because it wasn't really that kind of environment. They did a lot of RFPs. They had a lot of business that just kind of came their way from being in business for years and years and years and decades, and they had a very good name. But they wanted this really for internal cultural reasons. And so we worked on it, you know, in a very similar way, but the target was internal culture rather than some of the full, robust services that sometimes I do. And just the very idea of being proactive was the animating feature. So we're going to be proactive towards everything of importance that has to do with our clients' jobs. Had to do with the risk, had to do with communications, had to do with educating their clients, had to do with just all the things that they felt were critical that had to do with the work that they were doing on the jobs that they would do. So proactive was the single notion, the single word that we pushed through the entire organization internally. And it was just a wonderful process to see, and everybody was able to build out almost like applications. So for instance, in that kind of business, there's a lot of risk that has to do with the kind of work. So they said, okay, on the topic of risk, how are we going to be proactive towards solving risk for our clients? And they built out the data. They built out the priorities around that, and they did that for a bunch of different segments of what they did. So I hope that makes sense. Those are real clients, highly successful. You know, those are a couple of medium-sized organizations, a couple of large ones, but it doesn't matter. The logic is what's important. A differentiated offer, simple, and something that's executable and sellable. So here's a couple things for you to think about. What's your culture based on? What's your culture actually based on? What do you think would be the very best thing? And this is just a little bit of an exercise for you to do. What would be the very best thing? Now, some that are on the line or some that might listen to this later, maybe you're a sole proprietor. Maybe you're just an individual doing work. But it doesn't mean you still can't think about this and say to yourself, you know, am I going to be casual and friendly as a sort of a cultural imperative towards what I do and towards my clients? It affects how I dress. It affects how I talk to people. It affects how I sell. But maybe there's 100 or 1,000 people there. What's the cultural imperative that you want everybody to rally around, to unify around? And how valuable is it to your client base? There may be crossover there. There probably is, quite frankly. And I like people to actually start to think about some of the slogans that they see and hear about and like, and just start to analyze the difference between the ones that are actually offers to the marketplace and the ones that are really just contrived language and just sort of very, very creative, but just kind of go poof. They don't actually mean anything to anybody, and they might not actually be doing anybody any good. So let me take that. After you think on that, there's a couple things. Let me go back. So there's a couple things for you to think on. I especially would be interested in you thinking about, you know, what would your culture be based on if you started to think about that today? Something really simple, something really valuable. How do you want everybody to think every day about what the culture should be? Now, here's the big picture. I'm going to try to wrap this up, and then we'll see what questions we might have. And I want to make sure I teach you enough things that you walk away being able to implement some of these or at least start the process. But, you know, sort of giving you the nuts and bolts, giving you some of the philosophy of verbal branding and, you know, how I think about some of these things. But this next part, I think of it as four-dimensional performance improvement. And this is where the simplicity is utterly critical. So here's this platform that we've built, right? I hope you understand all that. But we're going to morph this so that we can look at it in a slightly different way. This is the big picture, the simplicity platform and the impact of it. So this kind of green dot here, it says verbal branding in the middle. Let's pretend that that is a finished product. We have the one or two ideas in place. We know what they are. It's done. We're happy with it. It works. Well, you know, what do you do with this? What's the big picture? So I'm just going to go right through this, and I think you're going to be able to follow, what the path of this and the logic is. So there's our finished product, verbal branding, 1 or 2 ideas. Well, the first thing you want to do with this is it starts internal, but do you use it to sell? Yes. Do you use those ideas to build culture and make efficient operations because everybody's on the same page? Yes. Do managers and senior management use those ideas, the 1 or 2 ideas, to make business decisions and strategy? Yes. Can you do everything faster because of the simplicity inherent in this platform? The answer is yes. Well, what if we go even further? The point I'm making as I'm going through this is that once you figure out what goes at the tip of the verbal branding pyramid, once your positioning ideas are thought of and validated and you like them and they seem to be working, you can point them at just about anything within your organization or everything, and it will help to push the performance forward. Social media, and well, I hope you realize, social media is not a strategy, it is a tactic. So social media needs a strategy to be based on too. So verbal branding, the platform itself, and the ideas inherent should guide and absolutely will guide your social media path. Customer service, customer experience, what's that based on? HR, who do you hire? Why do you hire them? Marketing, same thing. Are all these in line to be influenced by the verbal branding platform? The answer again is yes. Well, what if we just start throwing at the wall? What do you want people to be confident of? What do you want them to be relieved about just because they simply know now what to say when somebody says, what the heck do you do? How do you prioritize things? If somebody's going to be a zealot, what are they going to be a zealot having to do with? What's the strategy? Well, what about PR? What about storytelling? What about who to partner with and why? What about creativity? And you see, I'm just, everything I can think of, and I guess I could keep going, everything can be based on the strategy that's held within the verbal branding platform, because that's the way it was built. Now look at that. Does that look like a mess? Well, it sort of does, right? Like it's like a mess. Like this is why people feel overwhelmed in their businesses, because there's all these things that they think are important that are important. And they all seem independent sometimes of each other. Well, they're not. They're not if you construct a business simplicity platform based on the criteria that I've spelled out. I call verbal branding. That's the secret sauce. So that mess all can be based on the strategy that is held within the verbal branding platform. Next thing you know, it's just not quite as confusing anymore to try to improve the performance of all these things. And you know what? Not to confuse the issue, but here's how I really truly like to think about it. And this also has to do with the simplicity that I talk about. You want everybody in your organization to think and speak correctly about who the heck you are out there in the world of business. We're not talking about what category of business you're in. We're talking about how you're positioned for differentiation. Everybody ought to be able to think and speak with absolute clarity and simplicity about those things. And if they can, I don't care if there's 2 people around or 10,000, that means everybody can start the process of acting and reacting correctly according to your brand every single day. This is how a brand becomes operationalized. Now, I also want you to think of it this way. What do you want people to be confident in? I don't want to throw too many curveballs at you guys, but once you start gathering these ideas and it's got a finishing touch on it, and you unify people, there's a collective confidence that starts to happen. And next thing you know, the words that I gave you to almost start of, this is why we think we're different and better than anybody else. At first, sometimes it can feel like just words. Well, actually, those things are very real, and you want to gather your collective confidence around that. That's how the brand becomes built out every day as well, that everybody knows exactly what to think, how to speak, and there's a dynamic internal at a company where people get happier, more productive, they're clear, they know how to prioritize, they know how to talk, they know how to team up on things, whole bunch of things. I hope that's clear. And I would just ask, if you keep this a little bit small scale to start, I don't want to, kind of overwhelm anybody. This is a bit of work to try to figure out how to position yourself in the market for differentiation. It almost seems easy, but it's a little harder than a lot of times people think. But, one way to think of this too is, what do you want to target first? Do you just want to sell more? Or do you want to build like the company that I talked to you about a little earlier? Do you want to just build your culture into a little bit more of a unified machine? Do you want to start that process? Or is it operations? Or does management get on the same page? You tell me. What function in your business would you target first? The big picture is this, and I'm almost done. We'll be able to take a couple of questions. Vastly superior sales and communication. Look, the evidence is in. This is not sales tactics. This is a strategic way to sell based on positioning and differentiation in the market. It is a vastly superior way to sell and communicate. This is the way to unify everybody within your organization, doesn't matter how many there are. And we want simplicity to literally be a business tool for you to use every single day. Why so simple? Well, because if it isn't simple, it won't work. And I want you to think this way as well. The way to really get your mind in the right place to do this sort of development is to think, what ideas would we have to get in place if we wanted to obliterate the competition? We're not looking to grow 5% next year. We're looking to win every single deal. How do we do that? What are the ideas that have to be in place to do that? And I'll finish with this. Patrick Lencioni, he's the author of a book, some of you might recognize this, called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. A little bit of an older book now, but I really like this quote. It always, I think, fits the bill when I'm done describing some of this. If you can get all the people in an organization rowing in the same direction, you can dominate any industry and any market against any competition at any time. Well, I think that's true. And it just isn't all that easy to do, but it's worth the effort. You will outstrike your competition based on unity, based on differentiation, and based on simplicity. Now, who has... let me ask Jackie, have any questions come through? Who has questions now?
All right.
We'll have to do a little bit of a pass along.
At the moment, no questions have come in, but I am going to unmute everybody right now. So that
okay, great.
you can also ask questions. So everybody is unmuted at this point. If anybody has any questions for Stephen, now would be the time, or you can also chat them.
No questions, anybody? Curiosities, questions? I threw a lot at everybody, Jackie, right?
I don't know. I think you made all my clients be silent.
I'd like to make a comment. Isn't that, can I make a comment, please?
Sure, of course, of course. What's your name?
Dale.
Hi, Dale.
Hello. Well, I've been in sales for many years, and elevated speeches have always been the norm. And I think the way you've presented here is definitely a sort of a very different approach to selling yourself, and as you said, a simplified approach. So I think it's extremely helpful, and I want to thank you for presenting the information today.
Sure thing. You're welcome, and I'm glad to do it. I've been in the field for Dale, by the way. I think I mentioned, but I sympathize with and come from sort of that frontline sales environment. That's where I came from. I probably, because I've always sold no matter what I did, including now. So, I've been out there for 20 plus years. So I think some of the tactics people are taught work pretty good, and I think some of them are pretty bad. And in a sense, part of why I developed all this is try to help with the parts that I don't think work so good.
I think it's definitely worthwhile to turn the sales strategy on its head, and I think you've done a pretty good job, a great job of doing that, actually. So a different approach, and a well-needed approach, considering the same sales techniques that have been passed down from year to year, and basically given to salespeople, through different training programs. They're all pretty much the same. So this is a unique approach, and again, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Does
anybody else have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I I love what you're saying, and I love the idea of cutting the 30-second elevator speech down to 5 seconds, because people don't listen for 30 seconds. When you start off with something that the initial 5 seconds, something that differentiates you, and then as you add details, do you add details about that which differentiates you, and when do you get down to some of the basics of your business?
Yeah. Well, that's what that pyramid is for. And I couldn't hear Sorry, I just lost my line for a second. I couldn't hear every single thing you said, but basically let me say, once you differentiate in the way that I talked about, that's what really drives the ability to continue on into the more of the nuts and bolts and the detail of the company or whatever seems logical. And, you know, I kind of joke about this, but I mean it in all sincerity, is the way to not get to the rest of that detail is really from something like an elevator pitch, because people just get turned off and they stop listening. Yeah. So if you intrigue them right away and get them to be a bit curious and they sort of say, oh, that sounds a little different, you know, tell me more, there'll be a logical flow to that conversation that will now be in context of your brand, but you'll get to all the rest of that information. I think that's what you were saying, and I think that's what I think you were asking if I agree, and I do. I hope I got that right.
Yes.
But yes, that's the way to get to all that, is by first intriguing them with that differentiated positioning, and then you can kind of get into what's needed. You know, and by the way, sometimes some of that stuff that you're used to talking about never comes up because it's not really necessary anymore. Yeah. You know, people don't care how big my company is. They only care about my product, my differentiated product. So, you know, I stay away from the detail that is unnecessary. And if somebody asks me a question, I answer it. But then I don't bring stuff up proactively if it's not necessary. So you shouldn't either, I don't think.
I understand. Thank you. This is very interesting. I'm really intrigued by this.
Thank you. I think, Jackie, if you think I'm right, I think we maybe only have about another minute. So I wanted to make sure I let people know about it. I wanted to make an offer based on your audience, something sort of special. Should I do that?
Absolutely. And then I have one last question that came through chat.
Okay. Well, you guys can all just look on your screen. I'd love to offer this to you guys, and I sort of want to do it in a limited way because, frankly, it's a pretty good offer. I hope for anybody that would be interested in, and plus I wouldn't want to have this hanging out there for too long anyway because I think it's pretty aggressive. But based on my relationship with Jackie and her company, you know, and those of you that have taken the time to listen, what you see in front of you is something that I'm willing to do over the next short while. This is more or less something that I can do in April. So April's not too far from being over, but what I can tell you is if somebody was interested in this, it's 3 45-minute phone coaching sessions on how they do their turnover. I'm going to charge them $400. It's usually more like $850 or even more at times for that type of coaching sequence. But please let me know if you're interested in that. If somebody buys it in April, it can be delivered whenever they might like. They might not have time to do it in April, but if somebody commits to it, that's what I would honor, is that price, and we can get you hooked up on the coaching sessions even if they fall in May or whatever. And there's my contact information. But I would prefer, if somebody wanted, the way to get in touch with me about it is either to call me directly or send me an email with the subject line, virtually here deal or something along those lines. I'll know that it's you. Just make sure I know that that's what you're referring to. But it'll help me sift through my bunches of emails. And I hope that's attractive. If anybody's at all interested, I hope that seems like an attractive offer. I'd love to help out if I can.
Thank you, Stephen. That's a fabulous offer. And I just want to get to this one last question. What is Stephen's answer to the crazy test?
Did I teach and develop verbal branding? That's always the answer. So I'll backtrack real quick. So I'm a branding consultant and/or, just again, the category that I'm in as a business person is I'm a branding person. But there's a million branding companies, right? So why would somebody be crazy to not use me as opposed to another branding company? And the answer is what you would imagine, that I teach and develop verbal branding. Period. And then if I needed to describe it in detail over a minute or 5 or 10 or an hour or 20 hours, I can do that.
That is great. Well, I want to thank everybody that was on the call today. I'm getting wicked feedback, and I think it's my computer. So, Stephen, if you wouldn't mind thanking everybody.
Well, I certainly do. Thank you so much, everybody. I always appreciate, everybody's busy. I appreciate your time very, very much. I hope this was helpful.